Welcome back inside another edition of Mountaineer Report here, brought to you by WVU Sports Now. I'm Mike Asti. Ethan Bach not joining me as he is on a trip with the Portal Report, one of our transfer portal outlets throughout the Sports Now family of networks. So it is my job to preview West Virginia's Big 12 opener, the 1-2 Mountaineers, a rough out-of-conference slate to say the least, coming off of blowing a 10-point lead in the backyard brawl against Pitt. We'll now open up play against Kansas, a team that beat the Mountaineers a couple years ago, didn't play last year, and it's a different cast of characters, at least for the Mountaineers. Kansas does have Jaylen Daniels, who was a problem for West Virginia 2 years ago, and the defense may have a problem again. To have this conversation, I will be joined by Katie Maher of WIBW TV in Topeka, Kansas. So, Katie, thanks for jumping on. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for discussing this game between two teams that desperately need a win, and it's been kind of rough. So
yeah, thanks for having me on. You summed it up pretty perfectly. No one knows what's going to happen.
yeah. And West Virginia right now is favored 2.5 on the line. 56.5 is the over/under. We were talking about off the air. Smash the over. On that one, safe to say you want to smash the over with these defenses and what's even going on with these two teams, because both teams had expectations entering the season. Kansas was ranked preseason. West Virginia thought they should have been off the year they had last year. And Jaylen Daniels is back, but he's also back throwing 6 interceptions. So I do want to kick it off this way. West Virginia fans know why the Mountaineers are 1-2. They started off with Penn State, who's a much better team than them. They did win the FCS game, and then they blew a game against Pitt. They feel like they're evenly matched. They blew that game. I don't know how much you watched of the brawl, but it was rough for Mountaineer fans. I'm not sure if they're yet over it because they feel like they should have won that game, but there were many mistakes throughout. Why is Kansas 1-2? But it's been really rough for Kansas with all the expectations that you mentioned. So what's happened to the Jayhawks so far?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that there's just an extreme disconnect happening within their offense right now. For context, this is a group that is basically all returners who all have 2-3 years of starting experience. There are names like Devin Neal, Jaylen Daniels, Daniel Highshaw, Jared Casey, a few new faces on the offensive line. But for the most part, they've been kind of pleased with the offensive line. So I don't think that's been too much of a problem. But like I said, this is a group that they came into this season thinking this is going to be the year, because this was the year that they've been building towards. They're coming off a 9-win season for the first time since 2008. First
that was the national perception of Kansas during the season. Yeah,
exactly. And they come in ranked. There's just a lot of excitement around this program. Then they have a good week 1 win. Jaylen Daniels throws 1 pick, but that happens sometimes. No one was really too alarmed by it. And then the Illinois game happened week 2. 3 picks in one game, one of which was a pick 6. And that was just, it had the entire fan base just in shambles. And then it comes to week 3 and they're back at home and they're favored once again, like they were at Illinois. And then it's just a complete second half collapse. They started really strong in the first half. They were up at halftime. And then the second half, the defense just didn't have an answer for how mobile their quarterback was, UNLV's quarterback. They weren't expecting that. He wasn't who they played last year in the bowl game against each other. And then the offense, it starts with the defense allowing a 9-minute drive by UNLV and eating up that much play time in the fourth quarter. But it's also the fact that the offense just could not get anything going. Jaylen Daniels throws 2 more picks. And I think the biggest root cause of that is that Andy Kotelnicki, their former offensive coordinator, took a job at Penn State.
Yeah, we talked a lot about him going into the West Virginia Week 1 matchup, right? And he's
an offensive mastermind. He's
kicking butt with the Indy Lions right now for sure.
Yeah, and he'd been with Lance Leipold for quite a while, and he'd been with Jaylen Daniels for his first 3 years with the Kansas program. They built a rapport, and I used to watch the Kansas offense in years past and just think, this is fun. These are fun, cool plays. Kotelnicki is a guy who really knows how to make the most of the dynamic talents that he has with Jaylen Daniels, with Devin Neal, a 1-2 punch with Daniel Highshaw as well. And then 3 veteran receivers who I haven't mentioned yet, who also came back for one final year. That's Luke Grimm, Lawrence Arnold, and Quentin Skinner. And so Jeff Grimes comes in, coming off a little stint at BYU and Baylor. He's 2-17 in his last FBS and his last 19 FBS games. Obviously, that's not all his fault. He was at struggling programs.
Right.
But I think he came in and he kind of said, I have an offense with a lot of veteran returners and starters who are here for one final year. I'm not going to change what I want to do. I'm going to mold to them. It feels like, and I'm not saying that he's intentionally doing this. It just feels like that hasn't been accomplished yet. So there's just, bottom line, a major disconnect happening on offense. And honestly, the defense has been impressing me more than the offense has this season.
I was going to bring that up. Unlike West Virginia, that's collapsing on defense, allowing a lot of points, and has literally one of the worst secondaries in the country, which we'll get into, might be something that Jaylen Daniels is feasting over right now watching film. It seems like, oddly enough for Kansas, they're not scoring enough against quality opponents. You do have the 48 points there in week 1, but 23-23 or 20 and 17, and they allow the 23. That's just not enough when you have a veteran quarterback that's used to putting points up, and when you do have a change at OC. Now, we're hearing a lot of Kansas running a similar offense to what they had. It doesn't sound like that's fully the case, though. It's hard to duplicate what Coach Nicky was doing, and even seeing at Penn State, they were winning, but Penn State fans talk all the time about how they had a boring offense last year, and now it's fun and exciting.
Yeah. He's a great mind.
Yeah. So is there something going on with Jaylen Daniels for you? Because there are 6 picks here. Yeah, the offense is maybe different. And yeah, there are hiccups going on. It's a new coach. That's a different change for somebody who's a veteran quarterback that might cause some problems. But when you have 6 interceptions through 3 games, it's hard to, I guess, look at that and say you're playing well. Not every interception's against the quarterback, obviously, even though they go against the QB. But how is Jaylen Daniels playing exactly for you, separate from just the coaching hiccups? Because at this point in his career, he also should be able to overcome some of that, you would think.
Yeah, and I'm going to preface this by saying I think Jaylen Daniels is an incredible talent. I think he's he was in Heisman talks 2 years ago.
100% before he got hurt.
For reason. And I think, so I'm going to preface that by saying I think he's a very capable starting quarterback who's very talented. I think, and Lance Leipold has talked a lot about this, if you think about it, he doesn't have as many games experience as you would think a veteran quarterback would, because he's been out for so much. He was out for half of the 2022 season. He played 2 or 3 games of the 2023 season. And then Jason Bean took over when he was dealing with all his back issues, which were clearly more serious than they were letting on. And then for over half of fall camp, he wasn't doing it full out, basically, which, I mean, most quarterbacks aren't going crazy in fall camp themselves, but he wasn't doing, and they were updating us throughout fall camp of his progress. And, was he doing the full on 11 drills and all that? And he wasn't until the final week or so. But then that final week or so, Lance Leipold was like, I've never seen the kid look better, all this stuff. Every interception he's thrown, it's either been he just didn't see what was happening. The defender just read him really well and got the best of him. I think you just have to remember that he doesn't have as much experience as most senior veteran quarterbacks usually do because of his injuries. And that, combined with meshing with a brand new offensive style and rhythm, I think it's just thrown him for a loop. And Lance Leipold, in the post-game press conference after UNLV, he called it a, quote, fragile situation, because when you throw 6 picks in 3 games, it hurts your confidence. So now they're trying to protect his confidence as best they can. And so they have 2 offensive coordinators. Coach Zabrowski, who's their longtime quarterbacks coach, got the promotion when Coach Nicky left, and Jeff Grimes obviously came in. Yeah. He's the guy that we talk to when it's coordinator day. I'll say that, but the 3 of them.
That's kind of confusing. Do you have to ask questions about what does the other guy think as well?
It's nice to talk to Coach Z a little bit more, because he's he's a personality. I'd love to talk to him more. Yeah. He's got a really smart brain about quarterbacks. He's been doing it for a while, but he's known Jaylen for years because he's been with Lance Leipold for years.
Okay.
And they did talk about so in the past, Grimes has been on the field calling plays, and Grimes has been the one calling plays, but he's been on the field, and Z has been in the booth. And they think they might be switching that this week so that Grimes can get that better point of view, and Z can be on the field to directly talk with Jaylen and Grimes admitted they're closer. Coach Z.
Yeah, that makes some sense.
Yeah,
that definitely makes
it's what people have been asking for a while. So
okay.
I think it's the smarter idea because of that relationship between Jaylen and Coach Z, and then it just gives Grimes the better point of view of the field.
I wonder why maybe Jaylen didn't ask for that earlier in the season. Being a veteran, you would have figured clout there, especially returning. Talking here with Katie Maher of WIBW TV in Topeka, Kansas, as we are previewing West Virginia, Kansas, 2 1-2 teams, both needing a win desperately as Big 12 play now opens up. And the bright spot, and now with these new college football playoff rules, you could argue the out-of-conference games are exhibitions. Obviously, if you're not a conference champ, you'd want them for resume builder, but these teams kind of have blown that. So it's all about trying to win the Big 12. And if you win the Big 12, you're in, and then you can just ignore people arguing on social media that you don't deserve to be there because you're in nonetheless, and you're not going to turn down the invite. Were you at all surprised, though, that Jaylen Daniels is back with the Kansas program and going to cap off his career as a Jayhawk? Because nationally, there was some conversation on, is he really hurt? Is he just positioning himself to exit? There are even some reporting that there were backdoor conversations about Kansas intentionally shutting him down to help him exit. I mean, it was really getting funky out there nationally that I'm sure you saw. And sometimes it almost looked like some national media members were even duped by some rumors and were then reporting things that now it looks like just couldn't have been the case by him being back, being there. He threw out the video in the offseason with just a very subtle rock chalk, and that was it. It didn't seem like even much hype was put into it. It almost seemed like, ho-hum, I'm coming back. I figured I was, and everyone around the country was like, oh, we thought this was going to be a big drama. What was the reality of that situation in the offseason of Daniels eventually returning? Was there any chance he was not from covering this program?
Yeah, I mean, I saw everything about he's going to transfer to USC once Caleb Williams leaves and all that stuff. I never believed it for a second. I did a sit down with Jaylen after the 2022 season where he was hurt for half of it, but then was able to come back in time for the bowl game, Liberty Bowl against Arkansas. They ended up losing that game. And I remember he said how hungry he was to just get back and start winning more with the Jayhawks. And he opened up to me about, Kansas was his only, at the time, Power 5 offer.
Yeah.
And that meant a lot to him to get that kind of faith in him, because he said he's been doubted his whole life, like growing up in high school. Everyone said, oh, he can't throw, blah, blah, blah. Getting that boost of confidence with an offer from KU, even if at the time the KU program was
right.
KU program at the time.
Right. It's not a basketball offer. Right.
Yeah. He said that meant a lot to him. And then when Lance Leipold took over, Lance Leipold is a guy that guys want to play for. They really don't have, if you look at the transfer portal in terms of people who exit the program, there's really not that many. They're really just kids who know they're never going to play. And then, I've seen a few of them go down to D2.
Yeah, you want playing time. Yeah, it looks like that is where I think nationally people get lost. That you see the total number of transfers, because West Virginia experienced that even last year after a quality year.
Yeah.
Why were they still getting 40-plus transfers? A lot of them were depth pieces that just wanted to play, transferring down likely. You got to look at who they're losing in terms of stars or starters, and those numbers were down for sure.
Yeah, and if you look at, there were really not almost any starters that transferred out of the program this past year, unless they just graduated, because people in this program have really bought into what Lance Leipold is selling, because he's proven that he can accomplish it. He went from 0 wins to 9 wins in 3 seasons.
Yeah. I mean, it's an underrated turnaround for sure.
Yeah, they're bought in. I think it's a really strong culture, and right now it's just a matter of, can they be strong enough to overcome this hump that they're in?
Yeah, and can you ride that wave? Because Kansas has been riding a wave. The expectations obviously were very low. It's kind of, if you get Kansas into a few bowl games in a row, you're almost Vince Lombardi based on the prior decade. But if you go into the season with expectations and with a ranking, and then you pirate away, and you're 1-3 and you end up missing a bowl and all of that, and you kind of ruin the Jaylen Daniels return, then that is where you're risking losing some faith among the fan base, I'd imagine, when you're talking culture here. Katie Maher of WIBW TV here joining us on WV Sports Now, previewing the Mountaineers and Kansas. So I guess I'll also ask you, what is the vibe around the Kansas football program? Obviously, the basketball program is an historic program. There's going to be tons of fanfare every year and a belief they can win a national title every year. That is not the case, obviously, with the football program. There were special seasons, a couple of them within the last 20 years. Had that Orange Bowl run a long time ago. But outside of that, the perception nationally, I'm sure, is Kansas is a basketball school. They don't care about football. Doesn't matter what the playoff rules are. You're not going to see them win a Big 12. It's bottom of the barrel because it's Kansas, and especially after Jaylen Daniels would leave, it's Kansas football. Are they going to get another Jaylen Daniels? If they don't, they're just going to go down. It may not be true all the way through that, but I'm sure that's the national perception. What do you think the current vibe is, the reality of the Kansas program? And we also talk a lot about expectations now with the new conference realignment, how these conferences are shaken out and the new rules on what West Virginia fans, what WVU really should expect year in and year out from the program. What do you think is realistic as well for a Kansas football fan to expect out of this program on a regular basis based on the new college football landscape involving Kansas?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, before I get into more Kansas specific stuff, now that Texas and OU are out of the Big 12, a lot of schools are going to be fighting to emerge as the brand new big dog in the Big 12 in terms of football.
It's open.
I think K-State, I cover K-State as well. They're absolutely a front runner for that right now. They've had a pretty hot start to the season. They've got a bright future ahead of them. I think Kansas is also one of those schools that's in that conversation right now. And the Jayhawks really believe that they should be. And it starts with how passionate of a fan base they have. We know it because, like you said, their expectation is to win a national championship every year for basketball. When you already have that passion there with one sport at your school, if you just start doing well in other sports, it's not hard to get the fan base to buy into those, especially in a place where sports are so important, like Lawrence, Kansas. I mean, all they have there is the Jayhawks and then like 2 high schools. So they eat
similar vibe to the Mountaineers in West Virginia, right?
They
it's a college town.
And sleep crimson and blue. Yeah. So it's not hard to get them on that bandwagon of, hey, we're going to be good at football now. And there's excitement about it. And I think the most telling thing is that when you go on Twitter, like if you're on KU Twitter at all, people are heated. Like, after these 2 losses, it's been honestly a bit too much for my taste. And
I'm sure
I'll bring this up. Back at Big 12 Media Days, Jaylen Daniels opened up about how everything that was being said about him online last year really affected his mental health, which I thought was very brave of him. It's not easy for football players, especially, to open up about that. And every KU fan came out and said, this is amazing. Like, love our quarterback, blah, blah, blah. I'm seeing some of the same people say some of the most horrible things I've ever seen been said about a person online. And I'm like, don't flip the script. You got to support your guy. Yeah, he's thrown. Obviously, he knows he's thrown 6 picks.
Sure. Like, the players and the coaches are the ones they know more than anybody when they're sucking, right?
Yeah, but I have the utmost respect for Lance Leipold as a head coach. I think he's an incredible head coach. I think it was a fantastic hire. I think their athletic director, Travis Goff, who was hired a few years ago, I mean, he's the one who made that hire. He gave Bill Self a lifetime contract. He's kept some other key pieces and brought some really good new coaches in just all together. I think it's a really exciting time to be a KU fan to begin with. People have definitely bought into the football program actually being good, and they're holding them to a standard now.
Well, which is, I mean, I guess that's what you want. You don't really want to have fans be okay with 4 or 5 or even 6 wins for just a minor bowl game on a regular basis. I could see maybe after a down decade, okay, we're getting a bowl game. That's something to be proud of. But after a while, you do. I mean, West Virginia had 2 years ago, they had the worst season for that program in decades, really. And then the 9-win year last year was so celebrated because entering the season, the expectations were so down. Nationally, people thought they'd win only 4 games. But now, all of a sudden, you mentioned toxic social media. that's all gone. And it's like, okay, if you're telling me that you're going to climb from 9 onward, then I don't know how 1 and 2 works and blowing games works and not showing up for a big game on national TV when Pat McAfee shows up the week earlier and all of that. I don't know how all that works together, and the fans are well off the climb right now. So yeah, I totally hear you on toxic social media, but it is interesting that he was so open saying all of that, because it's definitely hard to be open, especially not only a guy, but a football player and then a quarterback. I mean, every stereotype that you wouldn't say that, he would fit that mold. So to be open with it, that's great, especially because it probably made some sense. He has had kind of a trying career. I mean, you almost got to feel bad. I don't know how anyone wouldn't feel bad at this point. Yeah, it's all bad luck. And then you come back and there's excitement, and this goes off the rails. But that could all turn around, and we'll see how Kansas fans react when they're watching this game, because I don't know how much you've watched of West Virginia this year, how many highlights you've seen.
I watched the Penn State game.
Okay, well, that's the worst game to watch maybe ever. But yeah, this has been a rough road for the Mountaineers so far. Now, ironically enough, it's kind of been a different rough road. They do only have the FCS win, but the offense, not so much against Penn State, but the offense kicked into gear and was scoring points against Pitt. It wasn't perfect by any means, and Garrick Green's been a little less than advertised, but they did score 34. The defense has just been, I think the secondary, literally last I looked, ranks 120th out of 132 teams FBS wise. I mean, that's insane. That's insane. And this includes major conference transfers. This includes Big Ten players. Like Garnet Hollis's secondary that he was with at Northwestern last year was well better than this secondary that he's also on. That it's one of the worst in the country.
Yeah.
So was there any conversation on this matchup and what they expect to see from West Virginia and how this could be a feast day for Jaylen Daniels? This really, as much of it's a bad matchup for West Virginia to try to get going, this might be the perfect matchup for Jaylen Daniels to have a really big game, get the fans excited again, and then throw up some numbers that they were expecting to see this year.
Yeah, I think the number, like you just said, the number one thing is this could be a game to get his confidence back. And I went to availability on Tuesday with the 2 coordinators and a few players.
Yeah.
Pretty much the exact wording of feast game for Jaylen Daniels was used. I don't think that was the actual word, but
sure.
That's pretty much what was said.
Yeah.
I'm hoping, for the sake of his confidence and the sake of this offense, maybe if they're going up against a not strong secondary, I'm hoping there's no picks. Obviously, a game with no picks would be huge for his confidence right now. Right. But also just a game where, and we kind of saw this against UNLV in the first half, he was showing a lot of flashes of Jaylen Daniels, the mobile quarterback that we expect to see, who can also throw. He had 2 rushing touchdowns all himself. He was slinging the ball. Just had 1 pick towards halftime. We'll change things. Yeah. He's a little bit shorter after that.
Yeah.
But I think this game will be huge if the Jayhawks can win, because if they do, I think it would do a lot in terms of getting Jaylen's confidence back. But also, and the defensive coordinator, Brian Borland, also talked about this. They really struggled to contain a mobile quarterback last week, he's a transfer from Holy Cross. And
okay, that's interesting.
They held their all-conference receiver to 4 receiving yards. The defense was playing great. KU has a great secondary because they have names like Kobe Bryant and Mello Dotson on there. Just combine their names for a second. They've got those 2 CBs. They've had a new face step up as a safety, and then their D-line, which has always been the narrative around Kansas, is if you just run the ball a lot, you'll probably score a lot on KU because their D-line can't stop the run.
Okay.
They've changed the narrative. They've shown that they actually can stop running backs pretty well.
Because West Virginia's going to try. That might be the opposite matchup.
But apparently, they can't stop quarterback runs just yet. We saw that last week. Basically, the only reason UNLV was able to make that 9-minute drive down the field in the fourth quarter was because every time, KU was providing great pressure on defense. He's trying to drop backs, not seeing anybody. So then he takes off himself and he gets a first down. Every single time, this quarterback literally led this 75-yard drive down the field basically by himself. So that worries me because I know that Garrick
I was
Green
gonna say
was too.
was
I
there?
think this could be a
Yeah, Garrick
potential,
Green.
unless KU's defense got back to the drawing board this week and realized what went wrong with the quarterback run. Maybe they just weren't expecting him to run that much, and maybe that just wasn't in the game plan they drew up. Maybe they're expecting it more with Garrick Green. I don't know. They know what he can do. So I'm hoping that they fix their issues from last week, because if not, it might just be a feast for both quarterbacks.
Yeah, and that's where you smash the over here, because I'm not sure how either one of these teams are going to stop the other, because it does feel like the exact weakness that one team would want to expose, the other one has, but then it's flipped the other way as well, because West Virginia, I'm sure, is going to test the running game. They have a two-headed monster in C.J. Donaldson and Jaheim White. They're going to test it, for better or worse. They're going to pound the running game, and Garrick Green is absolutely going to try to run around as well. So that might lead to West Virginia putting points on the board. Through the air has been a little up in the air. Maybe Kansas could get some picks in this game. You never know. He only threw Garrick Green.
Good at.
Yeah, Garrick Green only threw. Garrick Green threw 4 picks all of last season, and he did miss some games with an injury as well. And then already 2 in this game. And the end of that backyard brawl, it looked like he almost was trying to throw a pick. I don't know what was going on there. So, yeah, so it's been a little regression of Garrick Green, too, as well as Jaylen Daniels. These two teams, it is a bizarre matchup now to open up Big 12 play after the years they've had, because they're very similar in what they have to do, in terms of how fans are reacting, in terms of what needs to happen. I mean, really, it looks like one program probably could maybe save the year, and the other one, I'm not so sure how many fans are going to go to the next week's game. I mean, and West Virginia does have a bye after this, but that really is the situation here. Katie Maher of WIBW TV in Topeka, Kansas, talking to us on Mountaineer Report to preview the Mountaineers and the Jayhawks. Now, was anything said about Garrick Green? Like that does seem to be something that would be an issue for Kansas, because this is also different. I don't know if anything was brought up of the game 2 years ago when JT Daniels was the Mountaineers starter. Kansas won that game at overtime. A lot of points were put up. That was kind of Jaylen Daniels' coming out party. But this is a completely different West Virginia offense. Garrick Green was obviously the backup in that game. He did not play. It's hard, I would imagine, to watch film from that game and for them to scheme against West Virginia for this game.
Yeah, basically what was brought up about Garrick Green was just that they know what he can do with his legs, and it's going to come down to whether or not they can contain that. Because, I mean, they're pretty confident in their secondary. When you have cornerbacks that are turnover machines like Kobe Bryant and Mello Dotson, and then the rest of the guy, like Lance has said multiple times, he really likes how his secondary is tackling right now. His corners and his safeties, and then he's liking what he's seen with a change with the defensive line. So I think if the defensive line can just get it together, that's how you contain Garrick Green. If not, could make things very interesting in Morgantown.
Yeah, it definitely could. And the Mountaineers are not excited about the tackling or lack thereof with their secondary. Also, a Mountaineer D-line that's kind of banged up, even though TJ Jackson's jumping up on all these PFF lists. That they have some injuries, and I don't know if Sean Martin's playing like he should be. So this also, again, could be another feast day for Jaylen Daniels to run around. And there also was a lot of question, even off a question that I asked after the Pitt game, on whether or not Pitt was expecting Eli Holstein to run around as much as he did, because he scrambled a lot. I'd imagine Jaylen Daniels, if he watched the Pitt's game-winning drive, he probably salivated over that film, because Eli was really running around and opening up tons of space. He could have either ran or thrown to Pitt down the field, and West Virginia kind of admitted they weren't expecting that from Eli Holstein. I'd imagine, breaking news to them, they're going to see that from Jaylen Daniels in this game. Now, West Virginia right now is favored 2.5, depending on the sports book you go to. Do you have any prediction, any score, any feel for how this game is going to go down? We talked about smashing the over. Where are you? Do you think this is going to be one Kansas pulls out from the vibe you're experiencing down there and what you've seen from them, and knowing their desperation, and quasi covering the Mountaineers because they're the opponent this week?
Yeah, I do. I think Kansas can pull this one out. I think if they don't, they, as a team, are going to be hurt. Because they still very much have the attitude of, like you said, non-con is kind of exhibition at this point. They could still win out in the Big 12. They don't have the hardest schedule. if you look at their schedule, I mean, what they host, I mean, they'll play K-State at some point, like they do every year, which I think will be a very tough game. I think KU knows that if they don't win most, if not all of their Big 12 games, this season is not going to be what they wanted it to be. And this needs to be a season where they're fighting for a Big 12 title if they're really going to continue to get these highly rated recruits they're starting to get, if they're continuing to convince the fan base of the future. I'm also a little worried so they're playing all their home games in Kansas City this year because they're going over a whole reconstruction of the stadium, the booth as we call it. And so they played their first 2 non-conference games at Sporting Kansas City's stadium, the soccer stadium, because 25,000 capacity, sold both those games out. I'm a bit concerned for if they lose at West Virginia this week, are they going to sell tickets for the Arrowhead games? They're hosting all their conference games at Arrowhead. And I'm like, it's going
to look really bad if there's no one at those games.
I said this actually before the season started on a Sunday night show that we host. And I was like, KU needs to show up in their non-conference schedule to build excitement for Arrowhead, because if the goal is 76,000, if that's the capacity at Arrowhead, like that's their goal. The capacity at the booth was like in the high 50s. Do I think they could sell out Arrowhead? I think for the Colorado and Iowa State games, they could. Mainly
do you have an over-under at 45? Do you think 45 will go?
I think that might, if they can win this West Virginia game, then they come back home the next week. I think they got to do that. But I think this will be a high-scoring game. I think KU can pull it off because their defense is impressing me. If the defense plays to the caliber that it's been playing, and because they had, honestly, they're not getting enough credit for how tough their non-conference schedule was. Illinois is currently ranked in the top 25. UNLV is unofficially at 29th right now. They're 25 in the coaches poll.
They're group of 5, but they're a good program.
They could very well get into the college football playoff with the automatic bid that goes to whatever non-power 5 or whatever, however that works. I'm still learning it all.
It's going to be changing anyway, I'm sure, in a couple of years at this point. But
I mean, I don't think KU is getting enough credit for how tough their non-conference schedule was. And Lance Leipold has been saying this all along, and I very much agree with it. I think if they can start just proving that they can win in the Big 12, the season can go on.
Yeah, that's the ticket. Although they are playing the one, I'm sure you've seen, they are playing the one program in the whole conference that is not going to hear any complaints about the out-of-conference schedule.
Yeah.
So the West Virginia is playing 11 Power 4s. They had 2 rivalry games, and Penn State was one of them to open up the year. So,
I see this being high scoring. I think maybe like 38-24. That's going to be
so that's a convincing Kansas win then. And that is
if the defense plays well. I need the defense to play well.
I mean that would kind of be enough of the defense playing well, facing a good offense, and I would imagine West Virginia's defense would give you another 300-yard passer, would be collapsing yet again, and West Virginia goes into a bye week, which would then be doomsday for potentially this coaching staff, namely the defensive coordinator, if that is the result there. Just because this is the thing that West Virginia does. Now, granted, this is and I've already said this on other shows, I already got clipped, that this is a very, very, very bad matchup for West Virginia to be in a must-win situation. This is a must-win, though, for the Mountaineers. Would you call this a must-win for Kansas?
1,000%.
Yeah, because both coaching staffs, whoever loses this game is 100% going to say the song and dance that we said. Well, we know the vibes are bad, but it's only 0-1 in the real schedule, so we can reboot, and we're not out of it yet, and it's going to be like everyone's rolling their eyes at that point. So, this is a must-win for both. I'm going to go West Virginia winning this game, more of a 30-27 type of thing. I think this is going to be another close, lot of points. Could flirt with that over. I would imagine smashing that over. Maybe even more points than what I'm giving you are going to be on the board. I don't think it's going to get to late 40s, 50s with the double overtime. At least it's a noon game, so I don't going to be there till 2 a.m. if that happened. But this is going to be interesting, and they both absolutely need this game for sure. Before I get you out of here, Katie, and I appreciate the time, was anything said about the game 2 years ago? Because that, I'd imagine, obviously the West Virginia program was down that year, but if we're talking these programs, Kansas is the elite basketball program, and West Virginia kind of has both, but the West Virginia Mountaineers, football-wise, for anyone who's not aware, because it's been kind of down under Neil Brown, it is the 15th winningest football program. There have been 40 bowl games. This football program's historic. Kansas is, history-wise, looking up at this West Virginia football program at that time, because it sounds like you were covering the program at that time. What did that win mean for Kansas? I mean, West Virginia could argue they are the winningest program currently in this new Big 12. They could argue that if they get going, they are the blue blood of this current Big 12. You got to win now to be that. But I'd imagine that had to be a big deal for Kansas, even though it was a down West Virginia team. That's not just beating anyone who normally is good. That is, West Virginia is an historic football program.
Yeah, I think when I look back at that game, I remember it was actually my first year on the beat. I graduated in 2022. So I was a few months into the job at that point, and I came into this job with one understanding about KU, is that basketball was really good, football was really bad. And then they start winning their first 2 games, and I'm like, is KU football maybe not going to be terrible?
Yeah.
And then they win the West Virginia game, and I'm like, okay. And everyone's like, this is huge. So that was definitely a page turner for the program. Like you said, it was kind of Jaylen Daniels' coming out party.
Yeah.
That was when we really realized, okay, they might be doing some good stuff. And they look back on that with a positive memory, but I mean, it still went to overtime. There are still takeaways to learn from that, but because they're so different, honestly, they didn't talk too much about the team from 2 years ago. They just remember how hard it is to play in Morgantown.
Yeah, we didn't get much from that game either, because these two teams are so different. And I will tell you from the flip side, and maybe it wasn't fair accurate, because as you're saying, you're coming in figuring Kansas football is not going to be good. They just usually are not. When West Virginia lost that game, the vibe was, how could West Virginia lose to Kansas? Yep. This isn't basketball. This is
the world
football.
Is falling.
Yeah, like this is one of the worst upsets in West Virginia football history. Those words were said at the time. Now, obviously, now that looks insane, because Kansas, Jaylen Daniels showed he can be good. He dealt with injuries, and those years would even have been better if he was healthy. But they were certainly a respectable, good program, and they've been that for a couple of years. But yeah, at that time, that was the commentary, that it's one of the worst losses in the history of the Mountaineers. How could you possibly lose that game? What's going on here? Wow. And then that year ended up really bad. But that's the difference of the vibes there. And those vibes are going to definitely be different for these two teams after this one as well. Katie, I appreciate the time. Maybe I'll have you back. We'll be talking again with Kansas State, since you do cover both programs. Little different situation though for those two for sure. And this is going to be a fun game to watch. I'd imagine fans who don't care about either program, if you need a game,
they just want to watch for the chaos.
Yeah, you just want to watch points, and you want to watch chaos, and you want to watch two coaches that are going to be on camera a lot, sweating and realizing
I love chaos. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I'm for chaos, generally speaking. I'll let the world burn and be happy about that. Now, having to go into the facility a couple of days later is going to be not as fun. But yeah, I'm all for chaos. I'll try to keep myself off a viral clip after one of these losses, because that didn't work last week. But we'll see what happens. Yeah, it's all going to be chaos one way or another.
Yep.
And I think it's pretty much a lock that neither one of these teams are going to feel like this game is secured until late into this game. Maybe one can pull away, as you're kind of predicting, in the fourth quarter, but points are going to be on the board, to say the very least. Katie, I appreciate the time. I'll see you on social media. I know you said you're not making this trip, but I'll definitely be talking to you and maybe with Kansas State as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Katie Maher of WIBW TV from Topeka, Kansas, joining me there as we previewed West Virginia and Kansas. West Virginia right now a slight favorite at home, 2.5-point favorite. That's kind of a toss-up. They're getting that bump for being at home. These two teams are desperate. They both were supposed to be good entering this season. Yeah, Big 12 play is still there. The out-of-conference road was really rough for both. And Jaylen Daniels was a problem for the Mountaineers a couple years ago. He seems like that matchup that is really bad for this West Virginia defense, namely that secondary, because he's going to run around like Eli Holstein did. He's going to find space in front of him. He's going to be able to run and scramble and get more yards than Eli did. And then he's also probably going to find open receivers out there, unless the West Virginia defense and secondary can be better. And better, I don't even know is still enough because it's been so bad to this point. Again, the ranks are 120 out of 132 that even if it's better and it jumps into respectability, Jaylen Daniels is still a veteran quality enough quarterback to still get a win and still do something against that. He's thrown 6 picks though. This could be the game the Mountaineer defense finally nabs some, gets a big time turnover to swing momentum in this game. Maybe the defense can feast as well. It seems kind of like a bad matchup for maybe both these two teams and what they're trying to do, because Kansas usually does have problems against the ground game, and the Mountaineers are going to pound the ground. They're going to certainly run and take some pressure off Garrick Green, and Green, I'd imagine, is going to run too. He needs to be able to be a quarterback that can scramble, do it with his legs as well as his arm. He's tried to work on his arm so much in the offseason that I feel like he's forgot his legs sometimes. He scrambled a little bit more against Pitt, but was scared to do it against Penn State, it appeared. And then in the middle there is an FCS game. So these two teams need this. And it's hard to hate on the Kansas program. They're normally a basketball program. Maybe you hate on that. But football-wise, they're little old Kansas. It's kind of cool when Jaylen Daniels made them good, honestly, from an outside perspective. And Katie was talking about that too. And yet, Kansas loses this game, and it's going to be hard to pick themselves up. I can't imagine the vibes there. And it's already a basketball school fighting to get football fans. How are they going to get fans, especially when they're playing in a pro stadium that seats almost 80K? I mean, Arrowhead is one of the rocking stadiums in the country, but not if you're Kansas, a basketball school, and losing. I don't know how that's going to work. And of course, West Virginia goes into a bye week after this game against Kansas. So a loss, really a bad performance defensively, even if West Virginia wins, is going to have Mountaineer Nation all want Jordan Leslie fired. It's going to put Brown, and he is already back on the hot seat. Conversation will be had there. If I had to predict a loss here, we'll get Jordan Leslie fired. They will go into the next week after the bye without him. Shadon Brown will get promoted. I don't think Neil Brown gets fired yet, but I know already the fans kind of want that to happen and already are no longer trusting the climb, even those who trusted the climb from a year ago. So Jaylen Daniels has a lot to prove. Garrick Green has a lot to prove. The West Virginia Mountaineers have a lot to prove. The Kansas Jayhawks have a lot to prove. The noon kickoff, it's not later. The message has been sent. These two teams are disappointing. They're kind of fighting for who will be the most disappointing team in the Big 12 this year. Whoever loses this game will have a inside track to that title. And whoever wins will stay alive, and the vibes could change, and they're going to be fighting to rejuvenate the season despite a really rough slate and out-of-conference play. So thanks again to Katie Maher of WIBW TV in Topeka, Kansas. She also covers Kansas State, so maybe you'll hear from her again as we previewed West Virginia and Kansas from Morgantown. A must-win game for both programs, to say the least. I do think West Virginia wins this game. I did give a pick of West Virginia winning this game. Wouldn't be shocked in any way if Kansas wins this, though, because as I said on our past show, this is a really, as Katie touched on, this is a really, very, very, very bad matchup for the Mountaineers.